let's have some fun. Basically, I'm just going to close this guy up, blow it out a little bit, and set it up for an encolmo. Now, like any good glass blower, I always forget to bring things. So in this case, I didn't bring any handles, which means I got to go a little old school. We'll be working off some pull points. And music is always important. So glass is a very rhythmic process. Gathering it up, thickening it out a little bit. So there's a whole bunch of ways to open up the end of the tube. I'm going to be ripping a hole open. It'll help me get a more even opening. Basically, each time I'm getting the glass on the end thinner and thinner. And then it'll get thin enough that it'll rip open. It's going to be kind of a large vase. So I wanted to do something big enough you guys could actually see from out there. Something a little lively and entertaining. So the downside is I'm going to be working a lot bigger than the kiln can hold. So this is going to be one of those cross your fingers and hope it survives. Alright, so now there's a little hole open. And it's thin enough that as I start heating it, the surface tension draws it open. Then once that process stops, I use a reamer and open it up to the size I'm looking for. So if you do everything right, it takes very little adjustment to get a nice even lip that's ready to get in cold mode to the next piece. Alright, so what I'm going to need for the next part is going to be a smaller diameter hollow handle. So not having brought any normal handle material, that means I'm going to be pulling a point off at the end. So I'm just going to chuck up a rod, heat up a good section, and give it a stretch to get myself a skinny tube. It's a little bit wasteful because I'll be losing a chunk of color to use as handle that'll be trash in the end, but it'll work out pretty well for today. I'll be doing pulled points on this one. Like I said, I didn't remember to bring any blow tubes. You know, part of being a glass blower is being able to be flexible, in my opinion. Right. If you're the kind of guy who has to have everything just so, and then you don't have something, then oh, you're stuck, you can't do anything. I think it's really useful to be able to work under any circumstance you find yourself in. Torch doesn't matter. The material, I mean, you know, give me a beer bottle and we can have some fun. I'm going to be hopefully using a similar trick later, but rather than just pulling a point to use, it's actually going to become the neck for the vase, and that will be my handle. And that's the fun of working live. It's still good. So right now I'm racing against letting the handle cool. So it's cold enough I can actually touch it again and not letting that chunk that's a little touchy right now get any worse. With a larger time frame, I would be using a kiln more. So I would put something in the kiln, I would have done this, let it cool, cut off a section, but if I want to do something fun in the 2 hours, I gotta keep it moving. Toasty. So one of the favorite sayings in glass, it's not what you can make, it's what you can save. So different kinds of tubing have different levels of being touchy. There's a lot of glass where it wouldn't have done that. So it's not super thick tubing, it's nice and even wall. So a lot of the time you can just get away with keeping on going. Sometimes it likes to be a little troublemaker. Sometimes the surface will try and spread, and you can actually just pinch that right back together. Still a bit spicy. Half the time you just get to film me fixing stuff.
Yeah.
We've had a few of those times together.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But I always end up with something in the end.
All right. Somebody's gonna figure out one day that like I'm the common element. Like, well, all these demos keep going wrong when Mike Mason's involved.
You're doing the voodoo. I got it. All right, I'll keep it fine. I'll remember that for next time.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone but Mike.
Oh no, no! Now it's a challenge. It'll be everyone, no one but Mike.
I got you.
Now I gotta prove I can get past the curse. All right. So now the back end still isn't quite stabilized yet, but we're getting pretty close. And the mouthpiece is definitely still at the gonna put an O-ring burn on my lips if I try and puff. So I'm just buying a little more time. All right, now another good lesson, because I've gone through a bunch of these, lanyards do not go well with fire. So I can see the edge is already starting to get a little melty on me. Alright, now we're back in business. So I'm cutting in a little bit of a neckline because I want a good dividing point for later. It's going to help me isolate heat zones. So any crease in the glass kind of sets up a place where heat has trouble penetrating. So it's hard to get heat into that little crevice, which means that the heat on the one side versus the other stay a little bit separated from each other. Now we're back on track. Pulling off any leftover junk. And now it's like it never happened. So we're going to gather this up, puff it out, get nice and round, and then we're going to shove on that first piece I got started. So to help re-even the wall a little bit, since I got that a little messy with that, I'm just going to be giving it a little puff, little shrink, little puff, as I walk my mass back. So this is where that crease line comes into play. It's helping deflect the heat away from the handle portion. So I'm getting this kind of little semi-stiff area right by that crease that stops it from getting too floppy on me. So now, rotation is constant. Rotation is what you do to counteract gravity. You can think of it as a localized anti-gravity field. But rotation comes with a secondary problem, which is centripetal force. The faster something spins, the more it wants to spin out. Now, I'm going to be using that to my advantage a little bit later, but in this early stage, I actually want to keep my rotational speed pretty slow, switch back and forth a little bit as I bring the mass back into itself. As you can see how that top is starting to donut, which I want. Hang it down and let gravity counteract that a little bit. 90% of flame work is learning how to control heat, how to soak it into the glass, when to soak it in, how far to soak it in. Do you need a surface heat or an ambient heat? The better you learn and understand the nature of how heat moves through the medium, the more cool stuff you can do. There we go. All right.
Do you have everything you need?
Close enough. I ain't thinking.
You need water?
Oh, I would take water. Just prepping this to open up. So I'm ripping the hole open again. Just a wee pint-sized bottle, I tell you last. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So what are you making?
A squirrel. A flying squirrel. No, it'll be a big base. This will be the foot.
Put a squirrel on it?
Well, I don't know. We'll see. I got 2 hours. You can only do so much. Now if I don't make a swirl on it, I'll get in trouble.
I'll go get the brown. So this is Carl. He also goes by Grimm Glass on IG.
Alright, so now those two are sized. I really want to get them both nice and liquidy and even, so when I stick them, they just flow together. Alright, so I got just a good enough weld to be able to take it off, and I'm going to actually even it out and finish the weld after I've separated it. Now, as a note, we have already hit the first major challenge. So the way that tubing reacted to what I was doing tells me that one of the later moves will be a bit tricky. Well, we'll see how it plays. But now that I know what it's going to do, I can prepare for it at least to some extent. So some glass is just a little bit more poppy than other glass. It can shock, which is what happened. So since I'm going to be working at a scale bigger than the kiln, I have to rely on using other methods of getting my heat in. Using the steel to cool the glass along my chill line, so when I tap it against the table, it separates nice and cleanly, starting minimal fire, and allowing me to have an opening to work with for the next time I want to use that chunk of tubing. Unfortunately, since that one decided to go the explodey route, I'll have to go through the seal up the end thing again. So, in glass in general, I would argue that confidence is more important than skill. Glass can smell if you are timid, and it will take advantage. Right? So, if you fail, fail boldly. And the odds are you'll actually have less trouble with things going wrong. You know, if you start getting nervous and worried that something's going to happen, you're actually likely to add the kind of stress that's going to make it happen. So now this bubble's gotten a chance to cool down a little bit since we've established it's a touchy color. I'm just taking a little extra time before I really start ranging the heat in. Now I've got nice long arms, so I tend to like using the outer reaches of the flame more, so that way I can soak heat in a little more slowly, right? But this again, like I was talking about earlier, glass is all about learning how to control heat, how to soak it in, how to make it do what you want it to do. So there are times where you want to get right up to those little flames right in the center, right? You want to be really close and just blast the heat in shallow, but hot. There's times where you want to let the heat soak in slowly. The experience is what teaches you the difference between what approach to use and when. So, with most things in glass, there's more than one way to solve every problem. So, the real thing there is you want to start learning what each solution is best at and worst at. And then you try and match the solution with the situation. Alright, so of the 10 ways I could do it in Colmo, this is the one that matched up with what my goals were. So, in this case, my goals were I'm working with a short time frame, And I'm working on a pulled point, which means I'm going to have a higher rotational velocity, which we'll get to soon. That's that centripetal force I was talking about earlier. So you guys ever gone to the carnival and gotten onto that big spinning thing that pushes you up against the wall? That is centripetal force. It is one of the coolest things that you get to use in glass. So now to do the foot for a vase or a goblet or anything else, it's kind of frustrating because it's an exercise in perfection. To consistently get a perfect foot, it's about setting up the perfect bubble with the perfect wall thickness, the perfect even heat, the perfect even opening. Now, if any one of these factors is off, when you go to apply the centripetal force to spin it out into a foot, you'll end up with something that's either slightly oval or some other kind of weird shape. Now, with goblet feet especially, when you're going for that level of perfection, it helps when you're doing it all the time. So this will be the first one of these I've done probably this year. Maybe in the last year and a half. I've been doing a lot more milli work recently. So I might not achieve perfection, but it's going to be fun either way. So patience is always key, right? Now I don't use all the heat I have. I could have kept puffing that and gotten it bigger, but I don't want to get it too big too quick. I want to let that mass from the encolmo absorb into the mass of the main bubble and get me a nice even wall bubble that'll spin out really well when I get there. Oh, there we go. That's looking like a bubble. Alright, so there are all sorts of regions to the flame. Sometimes I want to get under the flame, angle the piece out so the heat deflects away from the skinny stuff that'll melt too quick. Other times I want to be in the center of the flame or even above the flame. It varies a lot based on what my specific goal in that moment is. And you'll see I often change between one orientation and another. So I'm constantly watching the glow, the heat, how it's moving, and trying to decide what adjustments I need to be making to help even it out as I go. Now you can see even as slow as I'm spinning, it's already trying to get bigger. It wants to spin out. Alright, that's about where I want it. Now one of the tricks to working outside of a kiln is I need this to be relatively thin wall. So if I end up with a super thick bubble, it's not going to be able to cool down without cooling down in the kiln first. We might find out that it still won't be able to, but there's only one way to know for certain, that's to do it. So, strangely enough, encolmos and feed are also kind of a cheater. So every type of glass has a different viscosity, and that viscosity determines how it works. So having that encolmo line, that straight line between the two colors, is going to actually help me keep the foot round, right? It might want to go oval without that, and sometimes even adding in a thin little stringer of black or something can help maintain your shape. So think of it like a slight thing of stiffness, holding it round. Alright, so now I'm about to be ripping this open, and then we're going to get to the fun part. And the fun part's either going to go really well or really poorly. Either way, it'll be just fine. Mistakes are not something you should ever be afraid of. Make them. And like I was saying before, if you're going to fail, fail boldly. Fail confidently. Fail with excitement. Failure is my best friend. Now, in this particular circumstance, I would have actually been better off had I reversed my color orientation, which if I remembered to bring my hollow handles, I could have done a little more easily. But I'm kind of committed, so I'm going to go with it anyway. So this green is stiffer than the sparkly gray. Right? So the sparkly gray will want to spin out faster than the green will. Now the green will be getting hotter, but yeah, we'll see how it plays out. It'll be fun. Now I know not all of you guys are physics nerds like I am, but trust me, in glass, physics is important. And you don't have to know the math, but if you understand the concepts, it really changes the way you work. Yeah, it's good to know that, oh, well, if I do these steps, this thing will happen. But if you know why these steps make this thing happen, you get more control over what you do. And this applies to any type of glass working, whether it's the warm shop, the cold shop, the hot shop, the flame shop, or the squirrel shop. And in case you guys haven't guessed, squirrels are my favorite non sequitur. It is a random choice because they're funny. Alright, so I've almost got that thin enough. It should be ripping open here on this next pass. So the rip open move is all about temperature. You know, if it's too warm, it can't rip. So you got to get it really thin and kind of cold, but still flexible. And it just rips open. Now, I could just heat and puff. Now the problem with that is no matter how you open it, the glass is super thin. When the flame hits the super thin glass, it cooks it. What it cooks out is going to be the flux in the glass, which is what makes the glass soft. So it gets closer to being quartz. So when you pop a hole by puffing, what ends up happening is one side of the hole is going to absorb that little quartz chunk, and the other side won't. When you rip it, that little bit of quartz that you're cooking your boro into is going to be more evenly distributed around the rim. So that means it'll stay more consistently around when you open it, spin it, flare it, or anything else. Alright. So I'm going to do just a little bit of work on the lip before we get to the fun part. So I'm going to let some heat soak in. I'm going to ream it open just a little bit. Then we're going to soak a lot of heat in and see what happens. But if I did my job right, I should almost not have to touch it at all, and it should naturally want to open round, clean, and even. The adjustments that I'm making right now are very minimal, if at all. Alright, so now I'm going to slow way down. I'm going to start soaking heat in. Now as we established, that green is a little bit stiffer than the gray, so I want to make sure that green gets nice and juicy. Now if I do this right, it'll just do pretty much all the work on its own, and as I start getting close to the end, I'm going to really speed up the rotation. That's when that centripetal force is going to spin this thing open, and I'll hopefully get a foot. If I'm really lucky, it might even be round. If I'm exceptionally lucky, it won't explode when I let it cool down on the bench. So as you can see, the hole's already opening. It's still looking round, so we're doing all right so far. Now you want to avoid going for the high speed too early, because the wider open it gets, the harder it is to soak heat in. So my chance to get my glass really hot is now while it's small. As it gets bigger, it takes more and more and more heat, and my poor little hands and my stubby little handle can only take so much. Alright, so now I'm shifting the heat strategy. I'm hanging it down, I'm shooting the heat up into the thing, and I totally forgot something useful, but fuck it, we're going with it. So it really helps when I close up the end of the handle, because right now all that heat is now blasting in and cooking my poor little fingers. but you get one shot at some of these moves. So if I had taken the time to stop, I would have lost my heat base. All right. Woohoo! Spicy. All right. So now we're going to drop this down. I switched to a flame that's high propane, really bushy and kind of cold. So this is how I'm going to soak some of the heat back out of it, let it cool down a little bit without using the kiln. Now, had I closed that up, I could have kept going longer and actually spun this out more. But that's that difference with the viscosity I was talking about, where you were able to notice how that green, that's where that bend kind of naturally stopped, right? That's where the viscosity change happens, and that's why sometimes an Encoma can really help you get a rounder foot. Now, since I didn't get to spin it as big as I was originally planning, that's not actually a problem. What it means is I'm going to flip this around into the holding fingers, I'm going to tear off the glass and finish shaping the foot from the other side. So remember, always be flexible. Have a basic plan, but don't be so stuck to it that if it doesn't work the way you wanted it to, you're stuck. Right? Always be willing to adapt and change. Like I said, confidence is a lot more important than skill, especially when you're starting out in glass. You know, be confident in everything you do. Whether it works or not really never matters. So one of my favorite standard kinds of holding fingers are really, really horrible because they are not even or straight. So better holding fingers are nice and straight. You'll notice how my handle is just so whee. So what you learn by using really bad holding fingers like these is how to work off axis, and that you don't need perfection to make something clean. Hasn't exploded on me yet. All right, we're in the zone now. So now again, everything that we do, especially on the torch, is about heat control. The next bit of heat control I'm going to be trying to do is getting the heat into the foot section that I want it so I can stretch that out and get the shape I'm looking for. And I want to do that without getting the metal tongs of my holding fingers hot enough to fuse to the outer rim of the foot. So I'm really watching the tips of my metal fingers. I'm soaking heat in and trying to keep it away from the rim. And I'm just starting to pull that mass away. So something else that's kind of useful is learn a whole bunch of different shapes, because there's all sorts of shapes a foot can be. So in this case, my foot's going to end up getting to be taller because of my mistake earlier. And Marias are always a fun way to accentuate a shape. So this is one of those times where I want to be that under the flame. I'm just barely glancing the narrowest section of the rim that I can, and I'm going to push it in to get a sharper edge. would have been a kind of weird, messier shaped foot, I was able to reshape entirely. So always be flexible, always be creative. Work with the piece of glass you have in your hands, not the piece of glass that you have in your head, right? Because the two are not the same and they never will be. That drawing you drew and that sketch you made, it'll be great. But reality, it's a different beast. So, for those of you that like the Bruce Lee quotes, I think there's a really cool one about be like water. It flows, it fills the container. This goes very well with glass. Be like water, be like molten glass, be flexible, be fluid, be adaptive, and be creative. And if you're not burning the table, you're not trying. Shh, don't tell anyone. All right. So now this is going to be the tricky part later. So you guys remember me talking about how creases in the glass can separate heat zones? Right, so that crease that I set up way back at the beginning of the foot is going to be something I'm going to use to hopefully prevent this foot from exploding when I take it off the table cold, bring it back up to temperature, and weld to the section that I set up to be my connector for the top half of the vessel. Right? Sometimes that's hit, sometimes that miss. So that'll be like the really big dice roll, the Vegas style gamble we'll be doing a little bit towards the end of this. But, there we got kind of a slightly shaped foot. Entirely different style than what I was originally planning to do, but that's the point. Never be hung up on the plan. So this guy I'm literally just going to let sit out. Foot's still a bit warm. I did not bring my carbon pad. So Kevlar gloves are pretty useful, so it'll be pretty forgiving. I'll damage the glove a bit, but they're pretty cheap and I replace them often. So I'm literally just going to set that guy down and forget about it. Forget about it! Alright. Alright, so as you guys can see, I got a pretty loose grip on this guy. So this is what the ability to angle your torch is for. Of course, it helps when you clamp your torch to the table. So if I catch myself on fire, don't worry, it's part of the show. That's the part where I get to teach how to deal with first-degree burns. Woohoo! So now the lesson we learned from round one is that this stuff is a little bit touchy. So after I close it up, I'm going to flip it around and toss it back in the kiln for a quick minute. So right now I'm getting just enough heat in. I'm going to actually swap it onto a solid handle before I get to turn it onto a hollow one. So I'm bringing all those outer edges into the center. Once they're in contact, I can just rip off a little bit of the material and get it centered again. So this won't be pretty, but it will be effective. Still good. Alright, now even with that partial handle attachment, you see how it just instantaneously gets a lot more controllable. So a lot more of the weight is now being supported on my right side or the left of your viewing angle. I'm just going to let gravity do my work for me. So that is a horrible weld. It is an ugly weld. It is an unstable weld, but it is a temporary weld. And even just having something, you know, again, it's that 2 points of contact, give you a lot more control. Alright, so now give that nice little tug. Let it center out. So I like diamond shears. You can do a lot of cool tricks. They're honestly, most of the time, they are not for cutting through something. Sometimes they are just there so I can get a nice little crease. Okay, so now, because the last one exploded, I'm going to toss this back in to warm back up so we don't do the same thing twice. This way I get to show you guys a whole new exciting failure. So one of the other great lessons I can give you from this demo, long handles help. So me working on these really short stubby things, I can only hold it up to about here. It'll probably boil water somewhere in that range. So it gives you an idea, and it helps to have an extra 6 or 8 inches over what you're planning for. But you work with what you got, you know, be flexible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to seal this side up, I'm going to puff it out, I'm going to open up to the size of the opening on the other end, and to save a little bit of time, I'm just going to weld straight up to that other side. And then we're going to have the neck for the vase and the body for the vase. This is actually why I really love getting to do demos in public. So it's really easy to do something when you're in your home shop and everything is exactly the way you would want it. It's a lot more fun to get to do it out in the wild, in nature, and see exactly what you can do. So now people think that rotation has to be perfect, and for some stuff it really helps. But you'll notice a lot of the time I'm using kind of what would be almost more of a hot shop approach, which is the flip. I go back, I go forth, and I keep it centered. I change direction. Sometimes I try and give it a couple full spins. So especially when you're working on a short handle, it's a lot easier. Well, it's sometimes the only choice. Gather this up one more time, puff it out one more time, and then it'll be just about ready to weld up to that other edge. Rip this open, flare it open to about match the opening on the other side of that, and it should be good to go. What, my shirt's not good enough? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, yeah, I got it. So normally I like doing it in Como a bit smaller than I'm going to be doing this one. So it helps when you start at a small diameter and you puff it out. So in this case, to work with A, the time limit, and B, what I'm actually dealing with, I'm going to flare it open to the opening of the other side of that too. So the downside is it can be a little messier. By starting small and puffing it out, it helps keep your lines straighter when you're done. So we might get a slightly wobbly Como when we're done, but we might not. That depends on how well I do my job. So now with an open tube like this, I got to be careful to angle away. If I angle towards, the flame will shoot through and burn me, which happens semi-regularly. So it's part of the occupational hazard. Okay, well, I got the sizing about right. The last real project I did took me about 9 months. So for me, 2 hours is a hyper-compressed time frame. So a lot of the glass I specialize in is long and slow. No exploding, no exploding. Oh, it might survive. All right. So I took a little extra time really soaking that heat in slowly on the outskirts of the flame. Ah, there we go. There was the exploding. But it isn't a bad exploding. That one's easy. That really messy connection I made because I didn't have the other handle, that was likely to go. So I'm going to start soaking heat into the length. I'm going to start shortening it up. It's going to be the body for the vase. I'm not really going to start doing much puffing yet, but I'll probably give it a couple small little puffs.
can find a stopping point. We'll do that one lined up for
All right, all right. So he's just letting me know that I'm about to burn through the first tank. Whoops. So we gotta get this somewhere good so they can swap tanks over. But I'm pretty close. I just gotta get this bubble blown out. So this is 33. So when it comes to hollow work on a torch, 33 is really your best bet. Now you can do it with soft. I mean, I've worked 104, 96, 130, you name it. Beer bottles, anything that's clever. But really, the stiffer it is, the more control you get. So the real challenge when you're using a softer glass on the torch is that, so in the hot shop they got the glory hole, which is a wonderfully diffuse heat source. I've got a super concentrated heat source. And really what that does in terms of the difference is that the wonderfully diffuse heat source gets you a really super even heat. Now with soft glass, even a slight extra glance in a section, now that section is going to blow out too much. All right, the Boro, much shorter working time, much stiffer material. It handles small irregularities of temperature much better. All right, so you can do the soft glass like this, but it would be a lot harder and more prone to cracking. So Boro is just super flexible. Now you can heat it up, yeah, COE 33. You can heat it up and crash it down, bench cool it, and it's really good for a lot of this kind of work. So if you want to play with a soft glass on a torch, I just recommend doing it slightly smaller scale. You know? Colors, colors, all around, and not a choice to make. Alright, we'll go with the green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a small connection point to the bottom of the object where it will be received onto the foot here a little bit later. Before we even get it that far, I'm going to be using that as a hollow or as a hand point to put on a handle so I can shape the top half. So it's just a small connector that's almost more functional than anything. So I'm just going to heat that up, melt that in, clean up my shape on the bottom a little bit, and then we're going to let him change the tank over. dropping the oxy? All right, but I can leave the propane on. All right, so go for it. So I'm going to use the propane to try and keep this thing warm. So not a lot of room in there. This will help me keep it alive, hopefully. We'll find out. So oxygen and propane. So acetylene's kind of nasty. It burns dirty. It doesn't do well at high pressures. Above 15 psi, it can actually ignite from the friction. Right? I'm probably running the propane, often at like 20 psi. For some stuff, especially if I'm using my larger torch. So this is still kind of a mid-sized torch that I'm working on. So they're changing out an oxygen tank. I'm just letting that propane keep it nice and toasty. But, you can start getting an idea. Alright. So now, this is actually going to get a lot taller, or at least I'm hoping it's going to. Like I said, be flexible. But the plan is, so once I get back in there, I'm going to be coming in, I'm going to puff out this shoulder, set up a more elegant top, and then I'm actually going to try and take a chunk like this and stretch it tall, and then we'll do a little details towards the top, and we'll be getting close to being done. Now, the nice thing about a project like this is I can keep going as long as I've got time. So with about a half hour, we'll see. I'll definitely be able to get through the vase, but if I'd had an extra 2 hours, I could just keep adding attachments, building it up, making it more intricate. So for a lot of the work I would do, I would consider an object like this the frame that I would then build on. And then I can just keep making it more complicated and more parts and more things to look at just until I run out of time, energy, or material.
So that face didn't crack by now, it's not going to crack?
Well, we'll see. So this flame is probably about, 450 would be just like a normal lighter candle propane, right? So once we get the oxygen back in, that's going to be bringing it up closer to 2350, 2800, something in that range. So it gets a lot hotter. So this is warm enough that you can usually jump up to the higher temp, but sometimes with a more touchy material, or sometimes right along that Incomo line, it can still be a bit touchy. So we'll find out. I'll end up easing it in. I'll start with a lot of propane. I'll bring in a little bit of oxygen and have a really big bushy flame, and that's how I'll get my warmth really back in. This is something that just keeps it warm enough that I don't have to toss it in the kiln.
Like a fuse glass, if you don't anneal it properly, you can do it a day later or a week later.
So this is one of the nice things with Boro. It's a lot more flexible. Now the same thing is true, right? But in general, if I make a properly thin wall object that's even, it could survive 100 years with no issue. Now you'll still be better off later on when I get a bigger kiln to toss it in the kiln and anneal it properly, and that should set it up for indefinitely. But I could get away without doing that for a lot longer. So now, you see how the surface is starting to get black? So carbon only forms below 1,000 degrees. So if I'm getting carbon from the propane flame forming on the surface, that tells me the temperature of the glass is sub 1,000. Right? Now that dull red glow when the glass starts to glow, that's going to be somewhere close to 1,000 degrees. So there's a lot you can tell about the temperature of the object based on things like the carbon buildup or the glow. The color of the glow tells you a lot. That dull red is going to be 1,000. By the time you're white hot, you're going to be pushing 2,300. And as you do this longer, you really get a good sense for what the temperature is just by looking at it. Woohoo! All right. So see, I'm staying really bushy. I brought in a little bit of oxygen. Start bringing the oxygen back up. this flame, this should be a pretty safe flame. I'm going to keep it here until I see that carbon burn off the surface. So I want to see the glass again. And that tells me that I've gotten it above 1,000. Above 1,000, the odds of it cracking are much, much lower. So basically, if I can get it there, I can go into my full heat and I should have no issue. Alright, so the carbon's burned off. I start backing off on the propane. I can see the dull red glow and we're in business. Alright.
Good afternoon. The show floor will be closing in 25 minutes, so be sure to get your shopping done.
Time.
You have 25 minutes and then the show floor will be closing. Thank you.
Alright, hyper mode engage. Please don't explode, please don't explode, please don't explode. So, what once was my handle is about to become the neck. So now the punny that I'm on is kind of fragile. So I've really got to be careful, and that's why I'm keeping it very vertical right now. tension that neck. Now, under an optimal circumstance, I'd be doing this with another handle and I'd be sideways. But right now, since I don't actually have any handle material, gravity is my friend. So it won't be quite as even as a stretch as I would have gotten getting to pull it apart with two handles. But that's alright, like they were saying, we're running out of time. So this is the sped up version. Now, since I'm not going to get to spend a lot of time evening out the lip, this will be a more organic lip. So, now in glass is actually a whole bunch of shapes. So this one will probably end up being something, I think if I can do it right, a Jack in the Pulpit might be the right turn. Or maybe not, it's evening out a bit. Yeah? So if you know you can't make something perfectly round, make it intentionally not round. So what was going to be a vase will now be a tall pitcher. Be creative and adaptive. oxygen. Come on, oxygen, you can do it. Had to bleed the air out of my lines. So this little hand torch is a lifesaver, really lets you get in, make sure you get a clean weld, because in boro you really need to have everything very cleanly welded. That was the punny. Oh well.
Oof.
Got close. Woohoo! And that, my friends, is how not to make a picture.